As you can see, this one has the tab on the end. The one from the camera does not. I really don't know how that could have happened. Right, so let's apply a bit of synthetic grease to that. This slides in from the bottom. Rotate that so that that lines up. That's good. Now there must be some history to this. I don't know, the camera obviously wouldn't work from a practical point of view if you couldn't rewind the film. So that's a very unusual thing to discover. Anyway, this can go on the top of the camera. It's held in place with 2 screws. It seems to move freely enough, that's good. And if we had a rewind knob on there, would that pull that centre up smoothly? Yep. I've got that. That's not lined up with the slot. That's better. Okay. Yes, that works nicely. Okay, well that's an interesting thing to discover. That's one of the reasons this camera was condemned. Carry on with this film advance. Put this gear in place. Now that couples the sprocket shaft and the take-up spool together. Or both of them are driven from that gear, you might say. There is a little ratchet pull that goes on here to ensure that that wheel can only rotate in one direction. The ratchet pull sits on there. And the spring for the ratchet pull is here. You've got to get that screw through the ratchet pull, through the spacer, and screwed into the top of the camera body. And check that the pull moves freely. It does, so that's all good. Now get its spring seated in position. You can hear that ratchet. You can probably see the action of that pull. That's good. Next, this drive dog goes on there. There's a conical shaped spring that goes on there, small end up, large end down. Then we have this piece. Now I know from experience, probably about there. I always look for that little cutout, and I know that if that's off to this side, that probably means I'm going to get about appropriate tension on that when I want to return for the return spring for the film advance lever. That'll give it an appropriate tension. That looks good. Okay, so we want that lever in there, the catch that locks everything in place. So let's put some molybdenum paste down there. There is the spring. There are two springs that look much the same. The larger diameter one drops down in there. The smaller diameter one will do the film release button at this point. Okay, so that's all in place. This goes on top, and I'm just going to lubricate the gear in that with a bit of grease. It sits on here like this, and it's held in place with 3 screws. I'll zoom you out a bit, you're not seeing much. One screw at the end here. That screw looks a bit chewed up. I think someone's had trouble getting the screws done up. Another screw of the same type goes in at this point. This is always awkward to get into position. Get it in place with a pair of tweezers. I should be able to get a screwdriver on it from the top and run that down. I just want that, I don't want that down completely tight yet, I just want it in place. So it's run down and no more. The spring that goes here is very important because the mechanism won't work without it. It's a weird shape. Don't start tidying it up, squaring it up, or doing anything else to it that you think might have been its original shape. It's an odd shape. Right, I've got my 3 screws in position. I can do those 3 screws up tight. That spring, to get that in position, I hold down this arm, lift the spring up with my tweezers and get it behind that arm. And that's it, it's sitting in position. The coupling gear goes on here. Give that a wiggle, it should couple up with that gear on the top of the piece. There we go. That's sitting in position. I've got to tension this probably 1 full turn from where it currently is, so that the film advance lever will return to the rest position. So I want it to start there. If the film advance lever is on there, press that, swing it out, would reach the end of its position and return to the rest position. So I'll just position this so my film advance lever is at about 90 degrees. So I've got to assemble that lever and lift that off. Pop that body to one side for a minute and have a look at this lever. So I've got most of what I need here. I've still got to find a spring. Back in 20 minutes. Well, so far I've struck out, but I've got another advanced lever here, which doesn't feel like it has its spring present. But I have to open it up and find out. No, there's no spring in there at all either. Okay. So, at the moment, it's not looking good. I can probably make a spring, though I know from experience that even installing the spring, the correct spring, is awkward. The chances of me making something that installs better or as well as the original is not particularly high. Still, we'll just have to see what I can do. Let's have a look at these springs here, see if there's anything here that lends itself to being used. I have in my mind's eye a picture of what the spring looks like that I want. And it's not one like that. It's like that, except one leg is longer and has a bit of a return curve on it. Well, I'm going to have to search some more places. Otherwise, I'm going to be stuck with this one because I simply do not have a complete film advance lever for a Retina 1A or 2A camera available. And there's another one of those. That's got possibilities. That's certainly not the right one, but I might be able to make that go. Oh, that's too stiff. I suppose I could bend it round and take some of the stiffness out of it. So that goes on there. I would have to shorten this, bend it back at the end so that it hasn't got a sharp corner to dig into this, and bend it around there so it starts more at 90 degrees than the 180 degrees it currently is. And I don't recognise this spring, which probably means that it comes from a completely different camera. A lot of my spares, I have a lot of generalised spares which are springs and screws and so forth, and they may have come from all sorts of different makes and models, and they're just things I've gathered up over time or been given. It's not uncommon in my past for people to have come across camera repair parts in an auction or something and get them very cheap and pass them on to me for use in my future repairs. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. I've got to get this spring in a useful shape if I'm going to use it. Well, I've got that in there. It's certainly working. Whether it'll work correctly when everything else is assembled, I don't know. It may have too much tension, may have slightly too little. To get it in there, I had to assemble this with one screw, with the plate quite loose, with the spring in position, but I couldn't get it tucked behind this arm. I had to feed through this piece of cord, get it over the end of the spring from this side and pull the spring into position. I pulled the spring right through underneath the arm, and then I was get it to run into the track. There's a little groove in the back of this arm. But however that might be, it's working, which is great. It means that now this will function. Why is that not lifting? That should be returning to the rest position at that point, and it's not swinging. Doesn't return to the rest position. Oh well, to find out why. No, I know why. It's because this arm is sitting down slightly low there, and so this catch is hitting the top of the camera body at that point. Needs a spacer under there to lift that up. Yep, certainly does. I find a spacer to put under there, otherwise that's going to go nowhere. Turn that round to 90 degrees. Just wants a spacer on the top here. You make sure that the arm lifts up to the right height. Well, I had another look at that film advance, and it was to do with the fact that this lever that we've just added into the film advance is probably got a stronger spring than it normally would do, and it just comes across further. Once everything's in place in here, that mechanism looks like it'll work. So I have my other components here all together. Now this frame counter spring that I've got sitting in the film advance here is not a good one. That's the one that the camera had, the broken one. And I've put that in there to check to see if the mechanism works. It certainly appears to be. I can tell that the ratchet action of the frame counter component, or the end of film lock, the ratchet action for that are obviously working. And I heard a strong click when it got to the 1 position, so it tells me that it would work at the end of the film. Yeah, that's working smoothly. So that film advance works nicely. I haven't tried it with a complete frame counter spring because they're not something that you risk lightly these days. So I'll have that back off. I'll glue back in the leatherette that I found to go on there and try a whole frame counter spring. And see what sort of result I get. Okay, let's glue back my leatherette first, I think. First I must make sure that there's no oil or grease on that brass plate. Otherwise the leatherette might not stick to it properly. Here is my piece of leatherette. It's a bit ratty looking, but it's complete. I'll put some adhesive here. And use a toothpick to spread that out. As you can probably see, this piece of leatherette's a little bit frayed along the edges. So the adhesive's going to be doing two jobs here. It's going to be gluing the leatherette down in place. It will also be preventing those frayed edges from disintegrating. Or so I hope. I can see through that leatherette, it's so bad. Yeah, that's thoroughly unremarkable looking. That could be any advanced lever at all. So back with the camera, put my lever in place. I have a good frame counter spring. Now you may well know that frame counter springs are now functionally extinct. You used to be able to get aftermarket ones, but they're no longer available. Something's not moving freely. No, something's not going right. What is it? Yeah, it's awkward to get that thing to seat into position. That spring I put in on the little arm is obviously somewhat more why is that doing that? I've got that on in the wrong place. I must have released that film release, yeah, I must have released the advance. Yeah, it should be better. Oh. No, I've got that spring in the wrong place. It should be here. Let's see how it goes this time. Yeah, that frame count is working. Right, so we've got a frame counter that works. If I was to put the shutter release components into this body, I could then put the top cover in place, and then the camera would only lack the shutter and lens assembly. So I better deal with that. Before I go mad with the shutter release, I should put the cocking rack in place. So I'll put some grease on there, slide this into position. Now as this comes all the way around to the normal end of stroke position, I'll hold it forward, push that rack into place, and it'll pick up. I'm looking at the position of it here. I want it in one tooth from there. So I'll do the same again. Will it go? I may need to take the frame counter off in order to achieve that. Oh no, I think we're just about there. That'll do. That'll do nicely. That's all in place. So the shutter release. Okay. Well, the shutter release is a little bit complex. We've got two holes in the casting for the two different parts of that shutter release lever. I'm going to apply some molybdenum paste to the inside of this lever. That's where it runs over the post down inside the camera. Normally I'll put a little spot of grease on here because that is where this collar sits. The collar that was on the wrong post previously. Then we can put the spring on the short post and lower that into the camera. That's in position. Put the shutter release on the top. I'll remove my film advance lever. Put my nice clean top cover in place, making sure the shutter release is the flat sides towards the front. Where's my film release? The film release button had the finer of the two coil springs. Being careful not to depress anything as I put the top on. Put my advance lever back in place. And make sure this thing's actually working properly. And it appears to be. So the frame counters all go. Shutter release works, moves smoothly. 2 screws in the top cover, one at each end. Now these screws are quite short. If you're stealing parts from another Retina to put the top cover on your Retina 1A or 2A, be aware that if you put a longer screw in this position, it will foul the mechanism. That's at the film advance end, and the film advance won't work properly. However, that's all good. I think it might be a good idea to put my rewind knob together. I'll just clean that. It's quite stained. I'm not sure what that dirty brown stain in there is. Could be rust. Would be from the spring here if it was rust. Everything else is chromed brass. Right. Where's the spring? Just give that a wipe with some synthetic grease. The knob over the top. Got the screw. It does screw into this one. Some of the cameras the screw passes straight through. It doesn't screw into the rewind. It passes through and screws only into the shaft. Not commonly, and it's awkward when it does that. Right, so there's the collar. Here's our rewind. Just put something through the fork, tighten that up. That's my camera body. So now all I've got to do is put the freshly serviced shutter back on the camera, and it'll be a goer. Well, I'll put the shutter back into the body. We'll see how this goes. Should go smoothly. Well, that shutter was already cocked. Okay, let's put it in there. Can't quite complete that cocking stroke, so I've got that at least one tooth too far advanced here. Let's lift that shutter forward, move that gear back one tooth, try again. That certainly moves nicely. Now I'm going to check this at the 500th. At the 500th speed, the shutter is under the most tension when you're cocking it. If it cocks neatly at the 500th end, then you're right. And if it doesn't, as in this case, it means that I'm one tooth out. That doesn't want to release. Okay, I've got an idea what's doing that. Let's try it on the 250th. I bet it releases fine. No, it doesn't. We don't have quite enough stroke on that shutter release by the feel of it. I'll get the shutter mounted in here, and I may have to make a change to the shutter release shaft. It may need a spacer. It may not be going down deep enough to fire the shutter correctly. That seems good. I'll just tighten that up. There's no problem releasing it at the 250th. Let's try it at the 500th. No, that's fine now. So there was no real problem there. Okay. So in review, what have we got? Well, I'm not sure that it's a lot prettier than it was when it came in, but it's complete. It now has a working shutter, a viewfinder you can see through, a film advance that moves smoothly, a frame counter that actually works. The end of film lock actually locks the film advance at the end of film. This one, yeah, it's no beauty queen, but it's a good camera. It would work well. Somebody wanted this to take photos. This would be a good example. I've certainly seen lots of tidier ones, but this is okay. It's not bad at all. Given what's in, I've had to do to bring this back. Well, in the film advance, the frame counter spring was broken. The end of film catch was missing. The spring for the end of film catch was missing. The leatherette patch was missing. So there's a fair bit going on there. Apart from that, I don't think there was an awful lot needed to be replaced. I can see I still need to do a couple of little jobs. The leatherette's just flapping a bit here, so I'll have to clean under that and glue that back. And at this end, it's raised here too. Now that leatherette's hard and dry there. I don't really like its chances of wanting to sit down flush in there. but I'll cheat. I'll put a bit of naphtha in there, hopefully that'll soften that leatherette up enough that it'll stick down. But apart from that, yeah, I think that's a good one. Compared with what I started with, it's a good result. Thanks for watching.